Welcome to the Stormsurf Video Surf Forecast for the week starting Sunday, November 27th. Looking at significant wave heights for the North Pacific Ocean, we see a gale producing 37-foot seas in the northern Gulf of Alaska, aimed mainly east. But other than that, not a whole lot going on. It's obvious that high pressure has a lock just off the California coast here, with much smaller seas, if not dead seas, in the core of that or under the core of that high. And then otherwise, a rather benign pattern elsewhere across the North Pacific. Let's get into the details. First off, let's take a quick look at that gale in the northern Gulf of Alaska. It started on Saturday as a gale here, just a little bit east of the Aleutians, but still pretty well displaced to the north. 25-foot seas, and built into about the 32-foot range by Saturday night, and then 38-foot seas by Sunday morning. But again, displaced well to the north, up here near 53.5 north, about 151 to the west. And basically all this energy is moving towards the Canadian coast, Vancouver Island. A good amount of energy for the Pacific Northwest, but once you start getting down into Central California and areas south of there and Hawaii, small swell will make it to California, but not a whole lot for Hawaii. Mainly, this is a storm directed for the northern Canadian coast. Given that, we then focus on the future, and we start this week's tour with looking at jet stream level winds. These winds up about 30,000 feet help support the formation of gales, and those gales do form, help direct their track. We're looking for troughs in the jet, a dip to the south, and there is a little bit of one here, but notice there's not a whole lot of wind exactly at the apex of that dip. That's not a good sign. But we do have 190 knot winds pushing off of Japan, and that offers some help. And there's also a good flow here also pushing through the Gulf. That is help supporting that gale or that storm that's up here. Winds to, what is that, 1, 2, 3, 4, about 170 knots, mainly 150 knots or so, pushing in to the Pacific Northwest. But notice there's no real trough there supporting it. Not a whole lot more is expected in terms of development. Also notice a split in the jet right here. And notice, remember when we looked at the significant wave heights, there's a big area of dead seas right here. One can assume high pressure is here. That's being supported by the split between, whenever there's a split between the north and the south, typically you get high pressure in between. That's also generating north winds along the California coast. Sort of a change from what we've been having, which is south winds and rain and or calm winds. So we're going to have to suffer for a little bit here. The likely suspect is that the inactive phase of the MJO, Madden Julian Oscillation, is now moving into the Pacific, and that typically weakens the jet stream, causes it to split, and causes exactly the sort of problems that we're seeing right now. It's been a good run of surf, epic number of large days, especially along the California coast, but that is likely coming to an end for a few weeks. Anyway, we start rolling this out, and we see a trough developing off the Kuril Islands with, 170 knot winds by Monday. So this could be an area here starting to support gale development. Ridge holds hard over California, if not building. The trough here in the West Pacific continues east over or up to the date line into Wednesday. There's the apex of the trough right there, so it sort of hangs back. And we're into Thursday before it reaches the date line. Again, ridging pattern continues. That means high pressure. That means probably north winds along the California coast. And then the trough continues working a little bit its way into the northern Gulf of Alaska, but notice there's still this kind of tendency for a split going on right here. Another trough develops Friday over the Kuril Islands, pushes east, but again, look at this. Winds are starting to fade. The jet starts to weaken even more, beginning to give you a sense that a split might develop here over Asia come next weekend. And as we roll this out, you can see that's pretty much what's starting to happen. The jet looks like it's ridging over the Bering Sea. The southern portion of the branch of the jet continues over the Pacific. Wind energy drops off significantly, and this is not a favorable pattern for storm development. It might be good for Christmas shopping, but not for surfing. Next up, we take a look down at the surface. Surface level wind, surface level pressure. As expected, high pressure, 1032 millibars in the Gulf of Alaska. Currently, light winds right in the center of that high. As you start moving away from the core of the high, Low pressure trying to make inroads. Here we go. Here's our gale in the northern Gulf. 40-plus knot winds from the west. Again, targeting mainly this area right in here. Sideband energy likely working its way down to Point Conception. But otherwise, not a whole lot going on until we get into Monday. And then notice we have a broad gale developing off the Kuril Islands. We have had very little significant activity in the western Pacific so far this entire season. This looks like the first real swell producer of the western Pacific for the winter of 2016-2017. And as we get into 18Z on Monday, 50-knot winds develop, building almost a little sliver of 55-knot winds Monday night. And then 50-knot winds continue reaching to the date line on Tuesday night, and then this system starts falling apart as it encounters the split jet here and high pressure, etc., etc. And then things kind of settle down a little bit. Still 30-knot winds in the Gulf of Alaska. These winds don't count. They're all aimed up at Alaska, unless you're in Alaska or northwestern Canada, of no particular interest. Another gale starts developing on Thursday over the Kuril Islands. 45-knot winds, but notice they're all encased behind the Kuril Islands. And by the time they escape into the West Pacific, oh, there we go, a little spot of 45-knot winds on Friday night. But quickly that starts declining. You're really ending up with 35 to 30-knot winds. That's good for about 13-second period wind swell relative to Hawaii. And then things fade out. Notice 1040 millibar high developing on Sunday. That's a week out in the Gulf of Alaska. A sure sign of not a good jet stream pattern aloft. And another high-pressure system here developing almost over the dateline. So things are going to settle down if one is to believe the models. Not unexpected. We're in La Niña, and with the inactive phase of the MJO taking over, that we would expect a 3 to 3.5 week weaker swell pattern. And then finally, we take a look at the effect of those winds on the ocean surface. As we saw before, 37-foot seas in the northern Gulf of Alaska, targeting Canada, and they start decaying and fall apart, moving into the coast on Monday. High pressure rules supreme off California. The new system, probably the largest of the next coming week, aimed mainly towards Hawaii, starts building, seas pushing up on Tuesday morning to 45 feet, 45.8 feet to be exact, with 52-knot winds. Actually, let's step back just to take a look. 55-knot winds there, and probably one grib cell somewhere right in that area Monday night. Anyway, 45-foot seas start pushing east across the Pacific and then make it to the western Gulf and then start falling apart by Wednesday night. Now notice, most of this energy, the Great Circle paths going down into Hawaii are like this. Most of this energy is aimed east. Now relative to California, that would be a good thing. But relative to San Francisco, that's shadowed by the Farallon Islands, so a little bit too far to the north to be optimal. Still, swell is swell, and there will be some longer period swell resulting. 45-foot seas could produce 20-second period energy. Anyway, and the remnants of that system pushed into the Gulf into Thursday and sort of fade out. Continued swell to result, not particularly huge or long period. Another gale develops next weekend off the Kuril Islands, was at 31-foot seas or so. And that's about what the models have been suggesting, making it to the dateline and falling apart. So another pulse of swell for Hawaii, but again, sort of directed a little bit too far to the east and not optimally down at the islands. You want these systems to be more down in here somewhere for Hawaii to get really big surf out of this. And then maybe a little Gulf developing in the gale. Probably more of a weather producer relative to California. We'll take it. Water, snow is a good thing. And then just for fun, we'll take a look at precipitation relative to California. Here's our big high pressure, low pressure in the Gulf. Move into the 6-hour forecast from the GFS model. We see precipitation. The whites and yellows are snow up towards Whistler in that area. But as we move into Monday, maybe a bit of snow moving into the Sierras. Not particularly a lot, maybe 2 to 4 inches. Things dry out. High pressure builds in. Tries to build in. A weak front approaches on Wednesday into Northern California. A little bit of precipitation. And probably not even a dusting of snow. That's it, a dusting on Wednesday night for the Sierra, and then basically it turns into a high-pressure show through the rest of the week, everything being blocked, no significant precipitation. This is the focus up here, British Columbia, Washington, not even down into Oregon. So next we start looking at the MJO, Madden-Julian Oscillation, periodic weather oscillation that travels from west to east on the equator, across the Pacific, and actually around the whole planet. The active phase supports storm production in the North Pacific in winter months. The inactive phase tends to suppress it, steals wind energy from the jet stream, and tends to support high pressure. So looking across the equatorial Pacific, New Guinea's here, East Pacific here on the equator, right there. East winds, trades are in control, but looking at anomalies, differences from normal for this time of year, winds basically are normal for this time of year, except in the main area that we're interested in, the Kelvin wave generation area, which goes from 135 east to about 170 west, a little box 5 degrees north and south of the equator. In this area, you really want to see westerly anomalies. Instead, we're seeing easterly anomalies, that driven by the inactive phase of the MJO. When the active phase is in effect, winds can die in this area, trades can die, and that tends to impart wind energy to the jet stream. But with La Niña in play, east wind anomalies have been the norm. We're really surprised there's not east anomalies over this entire area here, but there has not been the entire fall so far. That is good news. That suggests our La Niña that we're currently in, the rebound from El Nino from the past 2 years, is pretty weak, and that is surprising. Anyway, east anomalies in the Kelvin wave generation area, that would be at least a sign of the pending inactive phase of the MJO, but mainly we think this is attributable to La Niña. The forecast for the Kelvin wave generation area, and this is another style of chart. This is the whole planet on one chart, but the Kelvin wave generation area, the date line's right here, West Pacific right here, going down back in time, October. Blues are easterly anomalies, yellows are westerly anomalies. This is the exact opposite pattern than what we had last year, where it was all westerly anomalies. Active phase, the MJO, supporting El Nino. Now we're in La Niña. The inactive phase of the MJO takes precedence, or at least easterly anomalies do. We had a bout in November. Then another bout is developing right now, not particularly strong, but strong enough. Here, November 27th, easterly anomalies, there's your date line, and they're forecast through the next week, next 7 days, weakening slowly. We're probably in the peak of it right now, but this is really no different than what we've been seeing. In the past couple of weeks where we've had a good amount of surf, you could see that the easterly anomalies did die off some. That helped feed the jet stream. That was attributed to the active phase of the MJO. Looking at outgoing long-wave radiation forecasts for the next 2 weeks, we're looking for the presence of the active or the inactive phase of the MJO. We're seeing a weak version of the inactive phase of the MJO. Here's the date line. Kelvin wave generation area is right here on the equator, like we pointed out before. There's New Guinea, South America, Mexico there, Asia there. Anyway, inactive phase of the MJO means higher pressure, means east trades, means more sunlight reflectivity off the ocean surface. The active phase of the MJO is here over in the Indian Ocean, meaning more clouds, meaning less sunlight reflectivity. And you can see it on the scale here. Negative anomalies, meaning less sunlight reflectivity, outgoing long-wave radiation, if you will. Anyway, as we move through the next 2 weeks, the inactive phase of the MJO is forecast to weaken per this statistical model and disappear 2 weeks out as the active phase moves from the Indian Ocean into the West Pacific. 2 weeks out, this would be good. That would suggest maybe a return to a stronger jet stream, suppression of anomalies in the Kelvin wave generation area, and perhaps more storm production. The GEFS model, though, sort of rains on that parade, says the inactive phase of the MJO is to hold for about 8 or 10 days, but at the same time, the active phase of the MJO is to die in the Indian Ocean and not work its way off to the west, into the east, into the Pacific. Another indicator where the active phase of the MJO is looking at phase diagram charts. This shows you where the active phase of the MJO is. Now, how to read the chart. Assume you're looking down on the North Pole. The active phase moves from the Indian Ocean to the east over the date line, or over the maritime continent, over the date line into the West Pacific, across the Pacific south of the United States, and then into the Atlantic Ocean, then eventually into Africa, and then back to the Indian Ocean, all on the equator. This model suggests the active phase is right here in the Indian Ocean, and it's to collapse and fade. Once you get inside the circle, it's considered extremely weak and not even present. So this would suggest exactly opposite of that, that the inactive phase of the MJO is somewhere in the West Pacific. That's probably about right, just eyeballing it. This, per the ECMF model, the GEFS model suggests basically the same thing. Active phase, same position, same strength, collapsing over the next 2 weeks, with the inactive phase somewhere here, probably in the Central Pacific. And then one more model that suggests that, in fact, let's do the overview here. Again, date line runs right up the middle of the chart. Kelvin wave generation area, you can see it from here to here. So that'd be about from here to here. Current date right now, 27th. This is the future forecast. This is the past. Solid contours are the active phase of the MJO. You see we had one here in August, another one in the October to early November timeframe, a very weak pulse of it in November, responsible for our latest push of swell. And now the inactive phase of the MJO, moving from west to east, is moving into the Kelvin wave generation area, a small patch of easterly anomalies forecast, just like we saw on the other model. So there's good correlation between the models here. And that's supposed to last into, I don't know, maybe the 10th or so of December. And then notice westerly anomalies are forecast to build. Rather kind of weak, probably not even as weak as suggested here, but not really the active phase of the MJO, just sort of a dead neutral pattern. We'll call it a weak active phase of the MJO. And then you get even beyond there into January-ish time frame. The models, see, the issue is the MJO is just exceedingly weak. It's kind of being squashed by La Niña, even though La Niña isn't that strong. We're just kind of in a very lackadaisical weather state in regards to the MJO, which is neither good nor bad. It just doesn't help really supercharge storms, but it's not actively suppressing them either. There's not like massive, strong inactive phases of the MJO with no active phases present, as one would expect if you were to be in a strong La Niña. So overall, given the situation, we're actually not in that bad of a shape. Anyway, so that's sort of the forecast per this model, which isn't a whole lot different from the other models. It's just a weak MJO pattern forecast. Next, we take a look at what's going on in the ocean relative to El Nino or La Nina. Clearly, we see warm water here. This is the West Pacific. This is the East Pacific. This is the depth or the thickness of the warm water in the upper ocean. We see that this is from the TAO buoy array. These are the anchors off the buoys. X's denote where the sensors on the buoy lines are. Data from this is modeled. Then you can go sort of get a profile of what's going on. Warm water buildup in the West Pacific in the upper 150 meters of the ocean surface. A hard break here. Here's the 28-degree isotherm, pretty much on the date line. And then the thickness of the warm water gets continually shallower as you go east, moving towards the Galapagos and Peru. This is pretty typical of a La Nina pattern. We look at differences in normal for this time of year, anomalies. We see something interesting going on. This water here in the East Pacific was much cooler, even a couple of weeks ago, and certainly a month or 2 or 3 ago. And we do see warmer than normal water, 1 degree anomalies here, sequestered in the West Pacific. But the delta here, I mean, this is just barely below normal. One little pocket of 1 degree below normal anomalies right here in the far East Pacific. This suggests that La Nina is actually losing its grip in the subsurface in the ocean down at depth. This other model here, a little bit stronger signal, suggests we're still in, was that 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 3. So 1, 2, 3, somewhere maybe 2 degree anomalies around in here, but still over a smaller area than a couple of weeks ago. Warm water building in the west, but making little incursions off to the east. Certainly not a Kelvin wave or anything like that, but just gradual warming going on when, if anything, if La Nina was building, you'd think it would actually be getting cooler in here, but it's not, suggesting that maybe La Nina has already reached its prime. Here's some other data. Upper ocean heat anomalies, same sort of thing, upper 300 meters. Last year, December, Kelvin wave number 5, working its way from west to east. That's a pocket of warm water driven by the active phase of the MJO, westerly wind burst. The final Kelvin wave number 6 in the February time frame earlier this year. And then the inflow of cold water or cooler water attributable to La Nina in the April time frame. But here we go into the forecast. As we get down here, notice the warm water building in the west. That's typical of La Nina. But one would think this cooler water would actually start building. Now, it is starting to move its way off to the eastward, and we've seen that in other charts. But we're also seeing that it's giving up ground here south of Hawaii. And that suggests that La Nina and the high pressure associated with it. So high pressure typically, wherever the cold water is at the surface, high pressure is north of there in the North Pacific. So it's been consistently in this area, sort of like over top of Hawaii. And that's allowed a persistent trough to dig out in the Gulf of Alaska and the storms that have pushed into California precipitation. But this is sort of suggesting that cooler water is going to start getting a better footprint to the east. Higher pressure will build there, and that means maybe things are going to dry out relative to California, and Hawaii is going to get its opportunity at some surf. And that's not to say California won't get surf, and it'll be longer period, more distant swell, a little less energy and size, but maybe cleaner. And finally, we take a look at sea surface temperatures. So again, here we are. Here's Peru. A little bit of upwelling starting along Peru, coast Ecuador. Nothing significant, nothing any different than what has been in play all fall season. Lots of warm water off of Chile and Peru. There was more warm water up in here off Mexico, but it's losing ground. Here we got this little pocket of upwelling going on by the Galapagos. Steady stream of cooler water proceeding to the west from there. This is the classic La Nina signal, though not very strong at all. Most of the warm, cooler water has been out here south of Hawaii. There's Hawaii right here, but we're getting this stream steady and building here off the Galapagos. Here's the trend for the past 7 days. Now this is interesting. Plenty of warm water here along South America, and even between just the trend over the past 7 days. Warming off of Ecuador to the Galapagos, and then kind of a mixed bag of warmer pockets and cooler pockets. This has been the pattern mainly out in here since April. No real change indicated there. The overview, the complete picture here, cooler water south of Hawaii, right in this area, but notice here's this building stream. It's a thin stream and still surrounded by a lot of warmer water, but it's getting a little bit better of a toehold, and this La Nina pattern, not the La Nina, the inactive phase of the MJO pattern, that's going to continue to probably help dig this out a little bit more. It's almost starting to look as strong here as it does out here. Not quite, but it's getting better footing, and we've still got January and February. That's typically when La Nina reaches its mature phase. And we suspect that will probably dig out a little bit more. Now, we've been talking about, we thought the fall season would be the good time for surf in the Gulf of Alaska because there was remnant energy from El Nino still present in the upper atmosphere. And that certainly has appeared to be the case. The question is what's going to happen come January, February. We've been thinking that the storm track might shut down or move a little bit more to the west. We'll see, but certainly it seems like the local California pattern will weaken some unless the active phase of the MJO comes to the rescue. So we've talked about the MJO, we've talked about La Nina, but what's the effect on the atmosphere? Ultimately, that's what matters. So we look at the Southern Oscillation Index, difference in pressure between Darwin, Australia, and Tahiti. They've been keeping these records for a very, very long time. Good indicator. When this index goes negative, it suggests the active phase of the MJO. When it stays negative for a long period of time, it suggests El Nino, and of course the opposite is true. Positive means La Nina, or the inactive phase of the MJO. Current reading today, 8.08. We had a good little spurt here, a short spurt, of negative numbers in the mid-November time frame, but sort of looking back, really, other than this here, when the active phase of the MJO, this is the wrap-up, the active phase of the MJO, when we got in November, basically neutral to weakly active, and now we're moving a little bit deeper into positive territory. The 30-day running average, you can see it went down to -5 here. That's strongly suggestive of the active phase of the MJO, and 5.5 here even in November. But now we're inching up. We're almost at neutral. The 30-day running, or 90-day running average, of the Southern Oscillation Index was definitely suggestive of La Niña, but it is giving up some ground, mainly attributable to the active phase of the MJO that hung around for a month or more. That sort of cut into it. We're up to 3.47, but overall, the trend is pretty much neutral to weakly biased towards La Niña. No surprise there. And you can see this in the graphical representation of the 30-day SOI average. So back here, January 2014, the start of El Nino, big push of the negative of the active phase of the MJO. It rebounded some, and then you can see the trend, just draw a line through it, was steadily downward in July 2015, and then till January 2016, the peak of El Nino, and then you can see the active phase, big run of the active phase here last summer, pushed our index up into positive territory, and then another push in, when was that, August or so. Now here we've just come off a good run of the active phase of the MJO. We're still toggling around down here somewhere, which is slightly negative. We'll see where we end up, but I suspect this is going to go up and we'll be somewhere in the +5 range at some point here in a couple of weeks. The ESPI index does basically the same thing, but rather than measuring differences in pressure, it's differences in precipitation between the area north of Darwin, Australia, and Tahiti, much broader area, looking for absolute differences in rainfall anomalies. When the index is negative, that means drier than normal here. When it's positive, wetter than normal here. If it's wetter than normal here, that suggests El Nino, drier, La Niña. We're at -1.06, which is drier than normal and indicative of La Niña, but we were at -1.9, what was that, a month or 5 weeks ago? And so this also suggests that La Niña is losing some of its strength. And finally, the forecast for Niño 3.4 sea surface temperatures. This is the area from 120 west to 170 west, almost out to the date line. Here was our El Nino back January 2016, almost 3 degrees above normal temperatures. Crashing those, we move into La Niña in July, down to only a ½ degree anomaly. So normally you'd expect almost equal and opposite reaction. I would have expected La Niña to be down in the -1.5, 2 degree range, but instead it's only a ½ degree. The forecast says we're already past, here we are. We're in the beginning of December, so we're up in here. This suggests our average is about -½ degree below normal, and that we're slowly going to warm through the rest of the winter into being normal or slightly warmer than normal by next summer. This basically means the worst of La Niña has already come. Here's another modeled view. This is not a forecast, this is actuals. But you can see the temperatures in the Niño 3.4 region have toggled around. Basically, you could draw a line through it and probably centers somewhere around ½ degree below normal. Right now, we're down at -8.15. So this would be a good comparison mapped on what the forecast says to see where we're really at. We think we're maybe just a hair bit deeper than what the model says, maybe down around -0.6 or so, instead of the 0.5 that this model suggests. But either way, we're sort of splitting hairs. Not a horrible place to be in. So to wrap things up, gale is in the northern Gulf of Alaska, likely producing swell for certainly Canada, down into the Pacific Northwest, some energy for California to result, maybe a secondary pulse later in the week. Also of more interest, a storm forecast pushing off of the Kuril Islands in the next day or so, targeting mainly Hawaii, near significant class surf, but that's probably stretching it a bit. But good run of swell for Hawaii for a couple of days, and some filtered long period energy for California. Then after that, hard to say. Inactive phase of the MJO looks like it's taking over. We'll have a couple of weeks of sort of a down period here, and then it's going to be real interesting to see what sets up, because normally it's somewhere in the mid-December. So you'll have a whole bunch of interesting weather that can occur in the fall, but you really don't know what your winter pattern is going to be. Normally things get shook up around early December, and then you see where things really are at, whether things go dry, whether things stay wet. Too early to guess, but probably we're a little bit, things have been on the good side relative to California for both water and surf. We'd be kind of surprised if that pattern held the rest of the winter, but we'd take it if it did. Anyway, that's it for this week. We'll do it again next week, same time, same channel. Thanks for watching.